Good morning, good morning, good morning to you. Been a long time since you heard me say that. I was just looking back here, and boy, I think it's been over a month. Ooh, I took time. I took time. But good morning, we're back. I'm PB. I'm a pastor here at Christ United Methodist Church in Waynesboro. Great to be here in this place, and great to be here on this technology with you this morning. Great to see you. And this is the long-awaited return of PB Reads the Bible. Excuse me, which, like I said, I do read the Bible. But this is a particular thing because I'm reading it with you. And I love that opportunity, love being able to do that. So, see, we already have a couple people on there. Now, you might be new, just joining us for the first time or something. That's awesome. Or you may be somebody that's been following along with our videos since the beginning of December of last year. Wow, we've been doing this for quite a while now. Did a whole bunch of Bible books of the Bible. And if you've been a fairly regular, you know what I'm going to say next. But for those of you new, that's good. That's fine. We love that you're new. I'm going to say, go ahead and check in. Facebook tells me how many people, it tells me how many are watching or how many accounts are logged in. But I don't know what it is. So I like to see that. So use the comment section and say hello. Someone said this is like romper room roll call. Good to have that. And we got some folks doing that this morning. Good morning, Cindy and John. Good. Cindy and John. Good. You've missed me. Thank you so much. Yeah, I've missed doing this too. But I needed to prepare myself before diving into this. I'm still probably not as prepared as I would like to be or should be for discussing the book of Daniel. Glad to be back in the groove. Good morning, Marcia. Good to see you. I know we also have some folks that are regulars who may not be able to join us at this particular time. They'll be watching later in a recorded fashion. One of whom is my brother Ron. He's going to be having surgery in a couple days. So probably got things going on over the next couple days. But Ron, whenever you watch this video, you're in our prayers, my brother. We love you dearly. And the other thing, folks, you can do is you can always send me a text, either to say hello, or if you wanted to send me a private message, or if you have a question. If you have a question, you can put it in the stream, on the comments section here, or you can send me a text, 570-351-1619. Good morning, Marilyn. Good to have you here. Good to see you this morning. So if I'm not looking directly at the camera, it's for one of two things. If you see me looking off to my left, I'm watching Facebook to see what you're saying there. And if I look to my right, it's because I'm checking my cell phone to see if someone's sending me a text that I need to answer. Good morning, Joe. Sharing this. So we are starting up again. We're starting up again with PB Reads the Bible. I don't know what episode number this is. I'd have to go back, and I don't want to do that. But this is episode 1, day 1 for Daniel. Day 1 for Daniel. We're going to take a look at the book of Daniel. Now, Daniel is only, pretty sure it's 12 chapters. So it's not an extremely long book, but it might take us more than 12 days to get through it. I should say it will take us more than 12 days to get through it, because my goal for today does not include even opening the Bible to Daniel chapter 1. Okay. My goal for today is to help set the stage. We're going to do a few things this morning. And we need to understand what genre Daniel comes from, and what that genre means and what it doesn't mean. And ultimately, hopefully, we'll answer the question by the time I'm done this morning. We will hopefully be able to answer the question, why bother reading Daniel when it is so separated from where we are? Because as hopefully you'll find, we don't fall into the category, the group of people that the authors were writing to. We do not have a similar experience at all. So why bother reading Daniel? And hopefully we'll be able to answer that with the help of some of my resources. I'm going to be counting on a couple different resources as we go through. One is the New Interpreter's Bible. Gives a lot of in-depth commentary. Excuse me. The other is a book called Interpretation, Daniel, by W. Sibley Towner. The other one is Introduction to Jewish Apocalyptic Literature. Those are all, so those are some of the resources I'll be relying on. Don't think I'm smart enough to come up with all this stuff on my own, okay? Good morning, Cheryl. Hello, good to see you. So what I say to you, even if it's something different than you've heard in the past, doesn't mean I'm coming up with it all on my own. It is based on good scholarship by biblical scholars, and they're in agreement on many of these points. I'm not giving you stuff that's way out of left field, even though it might seem it based on your own experience. Okay, so let's delve into it. First thing we need to do, like I said, is to understand the genre, literary genre that Daniel falls into, the category that it is, the classification by biblical scholars, and what it is. So I'm going to use a word, but we need to define the word. We need to understand the word, and it means we need to forget a definition that we might already have in our heads. Daniel is one of two books in the Bible, although there are many other books that fall into the same genre. It is an apocalyptic, it comes from the apocalyptic literature. It is an apocalypse or an apocalypsis. Now, when we hear the word apocalypse, and actually if you do a search or go to Merriam-Webster's dictionary or something like that, and look up apocalypse, it will say the end of the world, or great disaster, the stock market apocalypse, something of that nature. And that's what that word has come to mean: total destruction, annihilation, end of the world. Ooh, it's the apocalypse. However, looking back to the time period in which these stories come from, that we, in particular Daniel, that's not what apocalypse means. And that's not what it means when we talk about the genre of apocalyptic literature. Some of them do involve the total destruction, end of the world stuff. And they all deal with eschatological theology, the end of time, whatever that means. But apocalypse itself does not mean that. Apocalypse quite literally means revelation, which is where the title of the book Revelation comes from. And it is revelation, not revelations. That irritates me when I'm watching movies or TV and their theology is always bad anyway, but they'll say revelations. It's not revelations, it's revelation. And that's where the word comes from. That's where the title of that book comes from, because one of the opening words in it is the apocalypse of John, the revelation of John. And so that's where the name of the book comes from. Revelation is the other apocalyptic book of the Bible. Daniel and Revelation are the only two that are 100% apocalypses. So apocalypse just means revelation, And those are the only two that are completely what would be considered apocalypses. Many other books of the Bible have hints of apocalypse in them, hints of revelation. Some of the prophets Ezekiel has touches on some apocalypse type material, and the Gospels have some apocalypse in them as they're dealing with these revelations and with eschatology. Eschatology does mean the end of time, the end of days. But that's not exactly the main point of an apocalypse. So since there are only two in the Bible, some people read them and they see similarities between the two, and they say, oh, that's because they're both 100% accurate predictions of the future, and they use one to support the other. And that's not why there are similarities. There are similarities because there are similarities. Apocalypse, every apocalyptic book, story has common elements. There are certain things, otherwise there wouldn't be a genre of apocalyptic literature. Okay, so they naturally have similarities. Apocalypses are not meant to be read literally. They're not meant to be read literally. Revelation almost didn't make it into the Bible for several different reasons, but one of which was a fear of people misreading it and misunderstanding it. And they were right about that. That's part of the problem of trying to read something that's a couple thousand years old. So that leads us to Daniel. A lot of people read Daniel literally, saying, oh, this is like a historical, Daniel's an interesting animal. It's like a different animal on its own, because we're going to find out that it's actually two different, it has two different styles of literature in it. Chapters 1 through 6 are hero stories, hero tales, and chapters 7 through 12 are the full on apocalypse literature. Okay. Why the difference? Because there are at least two different writers to the book of Daniel. Also, they come from two very different time periods, both of which are different from the time period that in which it is set. Okay. Daniel is set in the period of the exile to Babylon, which is circa 500 BCE. If you prefer BC, you can say BC or BCE. BC means before Christ. BCE means before Common Era. Okay, so it's the 6th century BCE is when the exile took place. And that is the setting for the book of Daniel. Now, reading it 2,700 years away from there, 20, whatever it is, 2,600, 25, 26, 2,700 years later, we might think of it as a historical document and saying these are actual events that took place and that it was written at that time. That's not the case. It was written much later. Estimates are that the first 6 chapters, the hero tales, are written in the 3rd century BCE, so 2,500 years after the setting, and that chapters 7 through 12 were written about 100 years after that, the 2nd century BCE. So if they were written in the 2nd and 3rd century BCE, but they're talking about something that happened 200 to 300 years before that, like why? What's the point here? Well, the point is this. The reason for that is a couple different things. You need to know what was taking place in those 2nd and 3rd centuries in order to understand why these authors wrote these things down. Now, what was the point? Because we have to understand that in order to understand whether or not it means anything to us or should mean anything to us today. It is describing, okay, like I said, it's 6th century BCE is where it is set, which is the period of the exile. So all the Jews were taken, many Jews, not all, were taken out of Israel and shipped off to Babylon, lived there for a long time under several different rulers, and even a different army came in, different empire came in and took over, and they were still in exile. Finally, they were allowed to come back if they wanted to. That was only one of the times that the people of Israel were living under foreign invaders, foreign governments. It was one of the times that they were taken away. It was the only time that they were taken away from the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom was taken away before that. But there were other times when empires came and had control over their land. Even when the Israelites were allowed to return to their country, they were still under the control of the foreign government, the Persians by that point. A couple hundred years later, a different empire, the Seleucids, were in charge, and the Seleucids they didn't like the Jews, and they didn't like the Jews worshiping, and they didn't like the way they lived. They just didn't like them. So there was a lot of persecution taking place. And that persecution reached its peak under a particular leader and a particular ruler, emperor. Yeah. Whose name temporarily escapes me. So let me just open my book to that page. It's Antiochus Epiphanes IV, I believe is his name. Let me just double check that one. Yes, Antiochus Epiphanes IV, or Antiochus IV Epiphanes, something like that. They name him a couple different ways. Antiochus Epiphanes IV, who is mentioned in some of the things from the intertestamental period. We've got the Old Testament of the Bible and the New Testament of the Bible. And of course, the difference is Jesus. There are other books that are not in the Bible, not in the Protestant Bible, not in the Hebrew Bible. They do appear in the Roman Catholic Bible, and I think they might appear in some of the Orthodox traditions. We refer to them as the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha. Some of them are the books of Maccabees, Maccabees 1, 2, 3, which describe some of the events under Antiochus Epiphanes IV. Although he is not mentioned by name in Daniel, he is very present in the book of Daniel. We'll get to that. But he was one of the worst persecutors of Jews, especially of quote unquote good Jews, people who were trying to live according to the law and were trying to worship God and lead those holy lives. So, under this terrible persecution by the Seleucids, someone sat down and started to write these hero tales, these hero stories. They set it in a place that would have been similar to what they were experiencing. Okay, so they set it in the Babylonian exile, Jews being persecuted, being forced to not live the way they wanted to live, or people were trying to force them to live. And if they were good Jews, if they were living those kind of higher lives, those good lives, they were strongly persecuted for it. So this author or authors wrote down 6 different hero tales, because that's what takes place in the first 6 books of Daniel. So they picked a name. They took this name, Daniel. Now, Daniel's not the only person in those chapters. His friends, commonly known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, those are their slave names. We'll get to that. are are shown as heroes, not only because, and no, I mean, we might think of a hero as a person who does something amazing and dramatic, rescues someone from a fire. Oh, that's a great hero. Yes, it is. Um, in these hero tales, it's not exactly the same thing. They're heroes because they they don't bend the knee, quote unquote. They stay uh, they stay Jewish. They do all the things that they need to do, regardless of what the consequences are. And they're heroes not through their own actions, but through the actions of God because of their behavior. Okay, so that ultimately, God is vindicated, and they are vindicated by God. They are vindicated by God. So that's the point of those stories. The second half of Daniel 7 through 12 is the one that was written, biblical scholars agree, during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes IV, the worst time of persecution of Jews in Israel by the Seleucids. So why did this other author or authors write this section of it? An apocalypse, especially the way apocalypses are told, are good ways, uh, safe ways. They're safe ways of pointing out things about society, pointing out things about leaders without getting in trouble. They're relatively safe because they use symbolism, because they're not coming right out and saying Antiochus Epiphanes IV. Instead, he says there's a fourth horn that grows on the beast that disrupts the first three horns. And okay, it is Antiochus IV, but without being named. You'll understand that when we get to that chapter. I hope you will, anyway. I hope I will. So it's a safe way of doing those things. That's one of the things about apocalypses. There's safe ways to say things. It's kind of like what Jonathan Swift did with Gulliver's Travels. We think of that as just this lovely tale, this fun story for kids, and it's not. It's political satire. It was a safe way of complaining about what the leaders of the government were doing at the time, and the leaders of the people were doing at the time. Anyway, I digress. But that's one of the things. So back to apocalypses. There are a couple things that are common about all apocalypses. Like I said, if they didn't have commonalities, they wouldn't be a genre. Apocalypses usually have, almost always have, sort of a this world, other world dichotomy thing taking place. Okay, usually, and it happens in one of two things: either a seer it goes to some sort of otherworldly level, which in Isaiah describes that situation, chapter 6, where Isaiah sees heaven, sees the throne room of God. Paul speaks about being taken to a place, to a heaven. John in Revelation speaks about that. So that's one thing, so they've got this otherworldly experience, and Daniel's no different. Daniel does that. Sometimes, and they're given knowledge, they're given quote unquote knowledge, they're given a vision, they're given a dream, they're given this otherworldly experience. Sometimes they're unable to understand it, and it needs to be explained to them. And so an otherworldly figure is their guide as they go through the experience. And usually it's an angel of some form. So they're in their travels, they're taken to a place that's really inaccessible to human beings, right? You can't physically go to the places that they're taken. That's one aspect of it. Other Others have it slightly different. The seer doesn't go someplace. They're just given a vision here. And it's sort of a recap of history, a recap of history. And even though it's a recap of the author's history, it's written as if it's a prediction, it's a fictive prediction. Lost you? Oh, sorry, Cheryl. I'm not sure what you mean. If you, was it something I said, or has my, looks like the video is okay. Okay. I'm sorry if I lose you. Don't worry, I'll be coming back to a lot of this stuff as we go along. So if we don't get it all today, you're going to be hearing it again from me. Sorry. Sometimes so it's, since the author is really writing about, has it set so many years behind them, although they're trying to make it seem as if it's their current time. It's written as if, for instance, Daniel is written as if it's taking place in 550, 570 BCE. It's really being written in like 175 BCE. So he's able to write a prediction of the future, which is really a recap of history. A recap of history. It's things that have already taken place. Revelation does the same thing. Revelation does the same thing. We try to read it as if it's something in the future, but it's actually stuff that's already taken place. It's already taken place. What was I going to say? Okay, so those are the two different genres of Daniel, the two parts of it. Daniel as a whole, we can see that Daniel as a whole is being written to a group of people that were undergoing severe persecution. Severe persecution. And we don't have that experience at all, not even close. Since it is not a prediction of the future, since we do not have that commonality of experiences, that the authors are trying to lift up these symbols of hope, these icons to continue to live and be faithful and all that, and we don't have that same struggle. Why is it important for us to read? Why is it important for us to read? I'm going to read a quote from Mr. Towner about that. Actually, I'm going to read two quotes. Sorry, let's back up a sec. I said it's not a prediction of the future, right? He writes, the book of Daniel does not map the future. The book of Daniel does render for us a picture of the agent of our coming redemption at work. In other words, God. In a narrative way, it makes certain profound religious truth claims about the future, and thus evokes in us faith in God's success. And it is precisely that faith that makes this book so valuable to us. Okay, so it's not that we have a commonality, and it's not that it's a prediction of the future, but it's the fact that it's speaking these religious truth claims about God's ultimate success. Because one of the commonalities of all of most books in the apocalyptic genre is a battle between good and evil, with good ultimately victorious. And that is the case whether it's a Christian apocalypse, a Jewish apocalypse, or any other Hellenistic apocalypse of the time. They have this idea of good versus evil in a battle, So the last thing I'm going to say is another quote from Mr. Towner, Dr. Towner, probably Dr. Towner, which again, it's the basis of the affirmation the call which rises from apocalyptic texts from the very beginning. This call comes to us from the very beginning of apocalyptic texts. Do not settle for the status quo. Do not settle for the world as it is being presented to us. Do not settle for the inevitability of what is said to be inevitable. We can hope for more than this. God will triumph. Because we believe this to be true and certain, we can live courageously now and move with courage into a better future. Period. That is the ultimate goal of apocalyptic literature. And that is why it is important to read Daniel, not to try to predict the future, but live with courage into the future. The same for reading Revelation. Well, my friends, 9:30. Sorry if hopefully I didn't bore you too much with all that, and hopefully I didn't lose you too much along the way. Tomorrow we're going to look in Daniel. We're going to open the Bibles and start reading chapter 1. And hopefully some of this stuff will start to make sense as we go through. Remember, the first 6 chapters are these hero tales written by one author, and they serve a purpose similar to yet different than the other half of the book. So, my friends, that's it for today. Thank you for joining me. I hope this is beneficial. Hope that God has spoken to you in some way. As you go about your days, keep your eyes and ears, physical and spiritual, open for what God is doing in your life. When you see it, when you hear it, first thing you should do is say, thank you, God. Thank you, Papa. The second thing you should do is tell somebody about it. It's a great way of letting them know that God is active and alive in our world. Until we meet again, my friends, be blessed. Be blessed. Bye.